calendar. Oh, we could do lunch. Hey, can you bring me a glass of water and some tea? Aaron.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Turn it up.
Warm.
Up. Turn it down. Have you been upstairs yet?
It's hot. No, is it cold?
Upstairs?
Oh, it's cold upstairs.
Oh yeah, the air's not working to change it. It's like an ice cube.
That's why they'll still look at that meeting on the Geo for your general fund. And they'll put it one notch below. Unless there's just something.
But we don't have
Unless
any
there's something
capacity in
totally.
that GO. We're maxed out. This week, we get the bond lawyers in here. They'll find a way to do it. I just asked the school board. That's why we got 400 mills.
We're not, there's still 13, there's 13, 10, 12, 13.
Hey. Parking zone.
And then they roll through the 8% and try to pay that off quick so that they can issue more of the regular 8%.
Yeah. That's why we have terrible tax rates. Can I get on your discuss parking? I actually know what we should do. Well, I saw some of them, just see what else, and then I'll be talking about that. Yeah, that swap lot, but the other one, creating a different pay lot where it's monitored 24/7. So we should try to generate at least it's a big number. You know, all right, listen.
The one, Finkel, in the green section, across the street from Meriwether.
Right, but is it the one that's ranch this way or is it the one that's way?
Okay.
Ranch is been for sale?
Dangerous.
Did they try to sell my place?
Yeah, you want to wait for Sam?
Are they across the hall?
I think she's paying.
Do we know when we're closing?
Close. First house to close.
No, it's right here.
Oh,
I haven't seen it. So we have four. We have four.
yeah, I'll get started.
On the green face after.
Daniel, you ready?
We're in control now.
We're making it great.
I was just wondering
Can you get something by the Senate?
if we're ready.
Not forced. Or by no
Daniel,
other
you ready?
choice.
I'm ready when you
Want to get started? Ed?
Mayor Pro Tem, we have a quorum.
We do. So I imagine Mr. Davis and Mr. Bedore will probably be here shortly.
I thought I saw Mo in the hall.
And maybe
hadn't
he's
heard
doing
it.
his benefits. I haven't done that yet.
Hey,
Do you have a new name now?
I'm glad you
So
decided
what are we
to sit
calling
at
him?
the table with us.
Really?
Mrs. Hammond, can we get started?
It's not that. I say, what is he doing? I say, tell me, what is he doing?
We've already settled one problem.
Here.
today.
What y'all got? Yes.
Present.
Here. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple things. The mayor is speaking at an Economic Outlook conference at USC, so he'll be over as soon as he can. And I know some members are doing their benefits, so people will be in and out. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to first acknowledge and congratulate our city clerk who got married this weekend.
Oh my goodness.
So we're so excited for you. Congratulations, and we love you. And we can't wait to meet Mr. Hammond and put him through the ringer to make sure that.
Just send social security number, I'll take care of it.
Make sure the benefits of that.
All right.
Tell your dad, right? Your granddad.
Ms. Wilson, I think we've got a couple switches. We're switching around a couple things on our work session agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Just to accommodate Mayor Benjamin's schedule, and he's always talking to Ralph and Kyle, so he said that if we could allow them to go ahead and go first, because he's so familiar with their presentations, and then he would hear all of Ms. Reese's presentation. Ms. Margie's with us today. So we will start with Mr. Garbushian, our federal lobbyist, Ralph Garbushian, and his team members here. Deborah's here with them for the 2018-2019 federal legislative report, followed by Mr. Kyle Michelle, state lobbyist. I know Caroline's here with him, I believe, for the 2018-2019 state legislative report.
So before we get started on that, I just wanted to make sure we knew the agenda. If we could ask Reverend McDowell if you would bring the invitation for us, please.
Sure. That's where I head. In the midst of this busy day, in the midst of all of the conversation we will hear and engender ourselves around today, we ask that you might touch us, sensitize us, allow us to hear and to be sensitive to what is being said. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.
We're always excited when Ralph joins us in Columbia. He, I mean, it's been years now. He and I were reminiscing this morning about when I first started at the city, and Barbara was with him, and so he has just really done a great job over the years for us, and we appreciate him coming every year to join us here in Columbia.
Thank you, and it's always great to be in Columbia, and we've had great meetings yesterday and today with a lot of city staff, and I think productive meetings. And I think a lot of you have had a chance to meet my new colleague, Deborah Dehaney-Howard. She joined us back in May, and prior to joining us, she was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors for over 20 years. So comes to us with extensive knowledge of federal local relations, and we're happy to have her on board. So I have I guess this controls the PowerPoint. Okay. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and then we also, in addition to the PowerPoint, prepared a kind of a more in-depth federal legislative update that goes into some of the issues in a little more detail, and then I have a third handout that just kind of outlines some of the increased infrastructure spending we've seen in FY 2018 and FY 2019, and then a document that I think we pass out most years, our federal funding chart, that tracks the federal appropriations process for most programs that directly impact the city or that might be of interest to the city and its partners indirectly. So those are the handouts. And want to.
It's a little tricky sometimes for some reason, Ralph.
Look on the side and see
Is
if
it
it's on.
turned on?
Turn off.
Oh, it's not.
Okay.
Okay. So want to really quickly, it's always good to start with the successes, and I know a lot of the talk in the media is how Washington is in gridlock and not a lot happens, and that is certainly true compared to the not so distant past, but nevertheless there was a fair amount of legislating taking place, and we're able to see some good successes, most notably the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That was the massive tax bill that became law at the end of last year. The tax exemption for municipal bonds was preserved in that bill. That's really the result of several years of lobbying efforts back to when there was first talk of a possible tax bill. Mayor Benjamin was head of a coalition, Municipal Bonds for America, that spearheaded that effort along with the Conference of Mayors and the League of Cities. So can't overstate what a big win that was. I would say that 4 years ago, we would have lost that tax exemption if they had somehow passed a tax bill then. I mentioned increased infrastructure spending, and we will get to a chart on the next page, but for FY 2018 and FY 2019, Congress and the President agreed on a 2-year budget agreement where they suspended the sequester and lifted the discretionary spending caps by $290 million each year, $290 billion each year. And as part of that, they set aside $10 billion each year for infrastructure. And what they ended up doing, they did the easiest thing. They divided that $10 billion in FY18 among existing programs. So among highways, transit, water and sewer revolving loan funds, so on, and transit. And one of the nice little victories for local governments is the highway money went through the Surface Transportation Block Grant, which meant half of that money was sub-allocated to urbanized areas. So that was a nice little win, and I think for FY 2019, they haven't finalized transportation spending yet, but that's going to be the case again. The Senate, we faced in the Senate Commerce Committee several efforts at preemption of local authority related to telecommunications infrastructure and in drones. Those were turned back. The long-term FAA reauthorization bill that was enacted earlier this year did not include a preemption of drones, although without getting too much into the weeds, it does include a lot of language regarding drones, and FAA over the next months and year is going to be preparing a lot of regulations around drones, including regulations for drones for delivery. So that could still have some impacts on the city, but no broad preemption of local authority to regulate drones. The city directly for Columbia, your delegation secured an additional $18.5 million in CDBG disaster recovery money that HUD should be releasing. Actually, I think the Federal Register notice for that is supposed to come out soon. And then it's because there was more money for discretionary spending in FY18, we got, for the first time in 7 or 8 years, increases for CDBG and home. And it looks like those increases will hold for FY19 as well. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act called for the designation of opportunity zones, and several census tracts in the city of Columbia were designated as opportunity zones. That's something that Senator Scott spearheaded along with Senator Booker. And then this isn't really so much a legislative victory, but going back over 20 years now, the issue of sales tax fairness, which was becoming worse and worse each year, the Supreme Court in Quill versus South Dakota ruled that state and local governments can collect sales tax from remote retailers. So that was an important decision. I mentioned increased suballocation of transportation funds. So of the share of the $10 billion that went to highways, it was allocated through the Surface Transportation Block Grant. And you can kind of see under the highway transit bill, that was going to grow incrementally, and you see that incremental growth from FY15 through FY17, and then you see in FY18 that extra addition of money. So that was a nice little win, and that's money that comes directly to Central Midland Council of Governments for use in the Columbia metropolitan area. And as I mentioned, a share of that $10 billion for infrastructure went to transit, and you can kind of see the impact on what CMRTA received there. And again, for both of those, it looks like they have not finalized FY19 spending for transportation, but it looks like they're going to do the same thing. So looking at a couple of setbacks in 2018 rather, I mentioned that the Senate Commerce Committee, we turned back language there to preempt local authority as it relates to telecommunications infrastructure. However, the FCC, as it's currently composed, I would use the word hostile to local governments. I don't think there's any other word you could use based on their statements and their actions. So the FCC has taken several actions to preempt local authority as it relates to telecommunications infrastructure and to limit your franchise fees from cable companies, and those are going to be probably settled in the courts. And I think we'll continue to see similar actions from the FCC in the years ahead. We preserved the tax exemption for municipal bonds, and I should add, we preserved the tax exemption for private activity bonds, which was touch and go for a while. Unfortunately, we lost the ability to retain the tax exemption if you do an advanced refunding of municipal bonds. So that going forward, you'll not be able to do advanced refundings of municipal bonds and keep the tax exemption. Legislation to change that has been introduced, but I think that's going to be a tough one to get back. The SALT deduction, state and local tax deduction, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act capped that at $10,000, and just kind of occurred to me recently that when people file their taxes next spring, that's going to be the first time that they're doing so with that new cap of $10,000 on SALT. So that will be interesting. Although the flip side of that is that the tax bill doubled the standard deduction, so fewer people will be itemizing deductions. And then we haven't talked a lot about this, but continued challenges of the 2020 census. Funding, we've overcome the funding challenge. The appropriations bill for FY 2018, and it looks like for FY 2019 will adequately fund the census, but the Census Bureau doesn't have a permanent director. They are facing challenges in court regarding questions about immigration status. Morale is low at the Census Bureau, and so I think really for Columbia and for any city, your complete count efforts for the 2020 census are going to have to be above and beyond what you would normally do for a decennial census to really get that complete count in Columbia.
I was thinking about, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just thinking about that, Ms. Wilson. I think maybe if we could dedicate some time in our retreat to talk about that, because we need to start our efforts. And I know that there's not as much help as we've had in the past, so we need to do that.
And
same thing. I just wanted to talk to the city manager that the 2020 census is an extremely important time for the city of Columbia. Annexations that we've talked about, we need to get completed so that they're in the city limits by 2020. And I agree with my colleague that we need to talk more about this at the retreat.
Who actually funds the local efforts? Usually we see local folks, but does the feds provide anything to municipality?
No, most most complete count efforts at the local level are a combination of local government money and then local philanthropy. And every Columbia and every city does a complete count effort every 10 years. Right. I just think that in 2020 it's more important than ever. Right. You really need to pull out all the stops.
The infrastructure of the federal census is funded by the federal government. Yes. But the extra effort that we need to make sure everybody is counted is funded by the philanthropy and the local governments. But the feds pay for the census takers and the apparatus for taking the census.
Correct.
We just need to make sure they do it a good job.
And the feds even pay for a general marketing campaign. Everybody should answer to the census. But a specific, hey, this is important to Columbia. Here's why this is important to Columbia. That's really on the local community. So I just want to hit really quickly, and some of the numbers on these slides didn't translate. I blame PowerPoint, but by now I think we're all familiar with the election results. This was turned in a few weeks ago, but the Senate it looks like it goes from 52 to 48. The Republicans gained a seat. It will be 53 to 47. So still a very closely divided Senate. And in the House, again, this was prepared a few weeks ago, but it looks like the final numbers are going to be 235 Democrats to 200 Republicans. That's a gain of 40 seats for the Democrats. So a lot of changes in the House, and not just a change in party, but
there are no changes. It's the same people running the same show.
Well, actually, I was about to say though, about I think 100 or so, give or take, new faces in the House. So.
But will they stand up and act like new faces?
That's to be, but it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the House. And and it's been long enough that since there was last time that the majority changed, that a lot of the returning Republicans have never been in the minority, and vice versa. A lot of the Democrats have never been in the majority. So a lot of dynamics in the House. So I think some pretty big agendas in the House and some pretty big plans, but at the same time, you know, the organizing, the committee assignments, finding the bathroom, you know, all that kind of routine stuff. So in the South Carolina delegation, you have a new member from the coast, but for the Columbia delegation, Mr. Clyburn and Mr. Wilson return, as well as your two senators, neither who's up for election. So just kind of to hit some key dates quickly, and this is about as broad as it gets, but it kind of gives you an overview of the year. In January, the new Congress is sworn in. Later that month, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has its annual meeting. In January and February, if the current Congress can't complete work on FY 2019 spending, the next Congress is going to have to do that. And then in March is the National League of Cities meeting, and that's an opportunity for you all. I always say that you are the best lobbyists, the mayor and the council, and of course any time of the year is, but the National League of Cities meeting, since a lot of you are up in Washington anyway, that's a good time for us to go visit the delegation and kind of hit the city priorities. And I think that'll be particularly important this year. And I'll get into some of the reasons why, but if an infrastructure bill moves, focusing on appropriations bills, I think that there'll be a number of issues that we want to contact the delegation about.
Well, Ralph, on that though, really during NLC, because so many people are trying to see, that's
Right.
probably not the best time. You know, in years past, we've actually taken our independent trip, and with the information that you're about to give about the priorities, maybe, Ms. Wilson, we need, as a council, consider doing a trip, especially, you know, Congressman Clyburn being, you know, majority whip, and, you know, it's a really good time for us to have some opportunity on their turf up there. I know
Day trips and we've done overnight.
I was gonna suggest that we do that. We go and, you know, as a city separate from everybody else, we can get more attention to than being on other people's clock.
Oh, absolutely. And if you can come at a time other than the National League of Cities, that absolutely is. And like you said, I think, you know, we can hit a good part of your delegate. It could even be a fly in and fly out on the same day, or fly in the night before, fly out the next afternoon. We can do that pretty quickly. So
Ralph and I talked earlier today, and Deborah, about it. I really would like to see you all do that. It's been a while since you have as a group. If all of it may not be that everybody can go, but I mean, we used to do it on a more regular basis. I know when I was in that role, and I think it's effective. Yeah, yep. So we'd love to see you do that.
Well, we haven't, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but we haven't done it in a long time. And it did, I think, made a big difference that we showed our face. And we did it on the non-National League Day, so we really got uninterrupted time with everybody.
absolutely. And when I say that you all are the best lobbyists, you absolutely are. You know, we carry your message and we work with your delegation closely, but coming from you has the most impact.
And Ralph will get into, as he said, some of the issues. One of the issues that I definitely want us to lobby for, if it becomes an opportunity, is the canal. So he'll talk about that shortly, as far as if there's an opportunity with infrastructure funding.
That's a 24/7.
And just some of the key issues, and I went through the last year pretty quickly. I did not hit everything, and I'll hit some of the highlights for the coming year. Budget, that's an error there. The sequester is back for FY 2020, and the administration will be submitting its FY 2020 budget in February if it's on time. And every indication is that that's going to be yet another austere budget that calls for the elimination of CDBG, of home, of the transit program, and kind of across the board. In the last 2 years under the budget agreement, Congress not only rejected those cuts and eliminations, but actually increased funding for things like CDBG and home and transit. But with the sequester back, with austere budget caps back in, with deficits, annual deficits approaching $1 trillion, preserving funding for those programs is going to be a challenge. There's already talk of another 1 year or 2 year budget deal, but so far it's just talk. And until that's in place, the sequester budget caps will be back in place for FY 2020. So that will be a challenge. Infrastructure, there's, you've probably all read as much as we all have about the Democrats in the administration. One area that they can work together is infrastructure. The chairman of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the incoming chairman, is Peter DeFazio of Oregon. He has said he wants to do an infrastructure bill. He wants to move it quickly. And he wants it to be big. $100 billion a year over 10 years, divided among various programs. It's a long way from there to getting that kind of a bill through the Senate. Well, a bill that the president agrees to that can get through the Senate. I mentioned $1 trillion deficits. One of the obstacles, are there enough senators, are there 60 senators who would vote for an infrastructure bill when all of that spending would be deficit spending? So there are some political hurdles to an infrastructure bill, but nevertheless, that is going to be a priority. And the most likely outline of an infrastructure bill is that they divide $100 billion among existing programs and maybe a few new ones. And as we look to addressing one of the city's biggest challenges, the canal, that could be an opportunity to get some funding there, particularly with some of the roadblocks we've encountered under current funding scenarios.
Ralph, what other number are you hearing other than 100 billion?
I'm hearing a lot of numbers, but you know, Peter DeFazio is the incoming chairman of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, so his number is a good one to start with. And you know, and he says $100 billion a year because you know the president ran on a platform of $1 trillion over 10 years, so that's $100 billion a year. You know, if they decide they want to offset it, can they find an extra $100 billion a year in new revenue to offset that? I don't know. So then maybe they go down to 50 or 60. It'll be sausage making. Probably sausage making at its most gruesome. You know, and all the focus is on the infrastructure package, but want to point out that at the end of FY 2020, the FAST Act, the Highway Transit, the law that authorizes highway and transit program, that expires. So in the second session of the next Congress, they'll begin working on highway transit reauthorization. And the big challenge there is revenue to the Highway Trust Fund is not keeping up with expenditures. We could actually have a zero balance in the Highway Trust Fund before the end of FY 2020. So the question is, how do you pay for another 5 or 6 year bill when revenue is not keeping up with current expenditure levels? And the appetite for increasing the gas tax or finding another revenue source does not seem to be there. So, and then the National Flood Insurance Program is on its, I've lost count, 7th, 8th, 9th short-term extension. I think they queued up another extension through December 21st for that. So we'll have to see, but that the challenge with the National Flood Insurance Program is claims outstrip funds in the program, and so how do you cover that delta? They tried increasing premiums last time around, and it ran into a firestorm of opposition. So that's the big challenge there. And then FEMA, the challenges we face there, and it looks like between the wildfires in California, Florence, the earthquake in Alaska, there'll be another round of disaster assistance funds, so that could be another opportunity. Local control, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, I'm sorry, but we're going to continue to face challenges from the FCC on right-of-way and zoning as it relates to telecommunications. Could also face legislative challenges on Capitol Hill. Drones will have to watch the FAA as they write regulations. And again, the list of regulations the FAA has to write on drones is a pretty long list, so we'll have to watch those closely. And then autonomous vehicles, the old vehicle for autonomous vehicle legislation was the FAA bill. That did not include autonomous vehicle legislation. But one of the issues they're still trying to work out in the lame duck, and if they don't work it out in the lame duck, they'll continue in the next session, is legislation governing autonomous vehicles. Threat there is, again, we've seen language that would completely preempt all local authority over autonomous vehicles. So we'll have to continue to monitor that and to fight back those kinds of efforts. Public safety, they have an agreement on some minor, but first step towards federal criminal justice reform. And what we'll have to look for in the 116th Congress is, do they build on that for broader criminal justice reform? And then regulations, it's tough to cover this in one bullet, but the administration has pursued a pretty aggressive deregulatory agenda in a broad array of areas, some of which directly impact the city. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, for example, has put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking as it relates to the Community Investment Act. And we've seen a number of other proposed regulations that could impact the city. And then one of the handouts, before questions and comments, one of the handouts is our funding chart. And I mentioned we have a 2-year budget agreement. We saw increased funding for most programs in FY 2018. And if you look at the chart, you'll see that we're going to hold a lot of those increases for FY 2019. But as I said, the sequester is back for FY 2020. And we'll have to fight to preserve funding for a lot of those programs. And just kind of a scorekeeping, FY 2019 started on October 1st. 5 of the 12 annual appropriations bills are law. That means 7 are outstanding. Of those 7, that's where most of the things the city cares about are funded: transportation, HUD, commerce, justice.
All the good stuff.
Right. Although it's interesting, of those 5 include defense and HHS. So those 2 bills alone account for well over half of, I think, 3/4 of discretionary spending. They have queued up the remaining 7, the agencies covered under the remaining 7 appropriations bills. That funding expires on December 7th, also known as this Friday. So they've queued up a 2-week extension to keep the federal government open, at least those agencies open, until December 21st, which means that they're going to bump up right against the holidays on completing FY 2019, and if they can't do that, then they will punt that to the next Congress. Any questions or anything I didn't cover?
Thanks.
All right, thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Kyle.
Thank you for the opportunity to continue to represent the city, work with the wonderful city staff that is very competent and knowledgeable, and they actually even respond to all of our inquiries on how this legislation may affect them.
Did you receive your check yet?
Yeah, yes, he's working on an increase.
Contract must not be.
It's coming up. Good one, Kyle, good one.
Always happy,
Always
have a
happy.
reason to go to work and to represent good clients. Said on behalf of myself and the entire Michelle family. Okay, this is a lot of material. I'm happy to go through it as usual, as quickly or as slowly as we want to. I don't want to take too much time getting through the minutia, but I did want this to be thorough for the record, and I want to get to questions and discussions as we go. So these were this year's adopted priorities that the council adopted a year ago. And I'm going to not go through each one of them because we're going to touch on all these as we go through the report. This is what we began with a year ago as the legislature was getting underway. The next slide is what happened in the budget in this past session. And the local government fund stayed at the exact same amount that it was at the year before, which was the same amount that it was at the year before, and was the same total amount, though a different mix of one-time and recurring money the year before that. We'll talk about the local government fund toward the end of this when looking forward to the coming legislative session, because there's a lot of momentum building to change the way that it is written, so that we sort of admit the reality that it is resetting at a lower level, and that it's not going to go back to the fully funded level that we discuss every year that the legislature has not seen fit to give us for 10 years now. This is kind of a sleeper issue, but it's something that's important to the city, because the big pension reform was done in 2017. The pension reform requires this step up in contributions from employers in the state pension every year. In the first year, the increase was 2%, and then it went up. It goes up approximately 1% for the subsequent years. The legislature paid for 1% in the first year. So they paid for half of it in the first year. And they continued to pay for another 1% this year. And this was something that we worked on with Ways and Means to make sure they were going to do that, because had they not, if you do the math, had they not put that in the budget this year, then we would have increased 2% this year. So they're catching the 1%, they're catching half of the first percent as it goes through the pipeline moving up. And I say that slowly because there was some confusion in discussing this, but if you untangle it, if they have, or if you peel the layers back, Mr. Palin could tell you why, if they don't continue to fund 1% every year, then we will go up twice as much as we otherwise would. So we worked on that this year. We will work on that next year to continue to keep that increase until we get to the final year of the increases. Then the next year, we'll see if they'll fund that one too.
How about the retirement system actually make more than 4%? That'd be a good way to approach it.
No comment. There's been a lot of great wailing and gnashing of teeth in the legislature over the performance of the retirement system and some of the decisions that were made over the years and how they placed those funds.
Makes it hard when people pull up in a Lamborghini.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But Kyle, we're gonna have to advocate for that every year, just like you did last year.
Right.
It's not gonna be that we're going into this.
If they don't fund it, if they don't fund another percent the next year, then we'll have to come out of pocket 2% in that year, because they are catching that first 1% repeating. So we continue to advocate for that each year. Did I go past it? I went past it here. Okay. This was the, may have required the most time of anything we dealt with this year, may not have. But in the end, we passed the abandoned buildings tax credit extension, which was important for a number of investments in the city that people were contemplating. The abandoned buildings tax credit was needed to make those projects go forward. Before this legislation was finally passed, when we overrode the governor's veto back in October, the tax credit expired on December 31st, 2019, which was not enough time for these developers to get their certificate of occupancy and claim the credit on these properties. So by extending it 3 years, now there's plenty of time to make the investment, finish the project, get the certificate of occupancy, which is required before claiming the credit at the Department of Revenue. So we are anticipating that we have every expectation that this is this extension for 3 years. We were trying to get 5, but the Senate Finance Chairman would not allow 5. He allowed 3. We have every expectation that this is going to unleash investment in at least 2 and maybe 4 or 5 projects in the city where people were waiting for this tax credit to apply.
Kyle, do you hear any rumors of a lawsuit on 1043 because it was bobtailed?
I hear that it is something that could be brought, but I have not heard any rumors that it's anywhere in the offing.
Is there any talk about trying to pass a clean one?
No.
I heard there might be somebody in the upstate who's getting ready
Who
to
usually
file.
does it?
Right, right.
File the lawsuit.
Yeah. And if he does, I think that if it is invalidated, the legislature will go back and they will pass a clean bill on our
They
subject.
should just do it.
That was not part of the heartburn.
Yeah, I agree with Mr.
They should
Rickman
just
that
do it now.
we should probably try to get that done.
They've already passed it, so it shouldn't be a torch to bear, but they ought to go ahead and do it now and eliminate.
Okay. Making notes. So, yeah, everyone talked about that. You know, the Christmas, they took some ornaments off the tree before they finally passed the bill, but it still had a number of tax provisions on there that might attract a lawsuit. Relocation of utility lines. This is an issue that we worked on a lot this last session that we're still working on today. I think I finally got this down after a lot of good coaching by Clint and Joey and Missy. Dana. When they do something like Carolina Crossroads, if our utility lines are in our right-of-way, they have to pay us to move them. They have to pay for the moving because we have the right-of-way. They're taking it away from us. That's called prior rights. We have the prior rights to be there because we signed the deal to be there. When our utility lines are in their right-of-way, they say, we're doing Carolina Crossroads, you got to move your utility lines, and you got to pay. So we had legislation that we've been working on with the State Association of, there you go, American Water Works Association. We've been working on this legislation so that DOT would pay when they come and tell us that they're going to have to move we're going to have to move our public utilities, water and sewer, that's in their right-of-way. And so, in the end, what we ended up with at the end of the year was language that said, state DOT may, but not shall, pay for the relocation of these water lines. We received a number of assurances, not in writing, but verbally, from state DOT that they want to assist in paying for those costs associated with Carolina Crossroads, the big project. We're working through that now with DOT to try to secure their agreement to pay for the relocation of those water lines, and that's still up in the air. In the meantime, we will go and pursue legislation again this next year that says shall, not may, with the DOT and with the Waterworks Association, because it's just too much of a burden on utilities to have to pay those, to have to shoulder those costs when the state comes in with a mandate that says you have to pay them now. It was the whole issue has sort of been amplified by the passage of the gas tax 2 years ago, because now DOT is flush with money. So and I shouldn't say flush with money. Now DOT has an extra. They have an extra amount of money to spend on all these projects around the state, which was the whole idea of raising the gas tax to address infrastructure. So now you're seeing utilities having to come out of pocket for these costs more and more, or at a greater pace than we did before they passed that gas tax. Okay, we're still on enacted laws. It was a busy year. These are three small ones that affect the city. We didn't lobby heavily on them, but they are all enacted laws because there are not that many laws that pass that directly affect the city. We like to put them in the report so that they're there. 2018 legislation. Now we've moved to things that didn't pass, but that we worked on, that we dealt with. And the business license tax was a really big issue in 2017, and to some degree in 2016. It came to a head in 2017, and in the second year of the two-year session in 2018, it just did not have any. It did not come up much. I think for all intents and purposes, right now, this issue is going to kind of recede a little bit. It might come back up if there's somebody who wants to come back and try to address it. There are a lot of valid concerns that people have over how burdensome the business license tax can be. If you're a business operating in the Columbia metropolitan area and you have to pay a business license tax and register in City of Columbia and Arcadia Lakes and Forest Acres and West Columbia and Town of Lexington and Blythewood and it's really difficult. Different registration, different times to register, different amounts, different filing papers. It's a tough issue. Trying to solve it and streamline it is something the Municipal Association has taken on. They are still working on it, but I don't think we're going to see legislation like we did 2 years ago to try to hammer local governments into doing it one way.
The association has their portal up and running now.
They do? Good.
And it is being used by a lot of cities, and I think that the course of action is going to be sort of like when we had the no smoking in public places law. The state never would do anything, and we did it through the association. Well, 80% of the population is covered by a model ordinance that the association did. And I think you'll do the same thing with business license, and that needs to be on our agenda sometime in the future of trying to conform our ordinance to the model ordinance so that we can participate in it.
And be listed on the portal where a business can go and click and get it done. Right. I think and to the extent that there is participation in that, it really is a prophylactic against state legislation. I mean, if everybody signs up, then there's not going to be all these issues that businesses have are going to be taken care of. There's not going to be a need for the state to do it.
And they have taken care of the concerns of the businesses that they raise. They have it. The portal's being handled by a third party.
Okay.
So it's a lot of the obstacles to passing the legislation have been taken care of.
Okay, this is an issue that you see every year, and it is it's not a small issue, but it's a really discrete issue. The PVC industry, which is American Chemistry Council, has been working in state legislatures for several years now, trying to get legislation that would essentially, the legislation sounds very innocuous, but it would essentially give them a legal standing, a legal toehold to file an action against the procurement of pipe in an RFP that they don't have today. So what they want is they want to be able to challenge when a utility, water, sewer, purchases something other than PVC. They want to be able to review it and then challenge it in court if they think that PVC should have been chosen because PVC would have been cheaper. All the utilities in the state are against it. All the public utilities are definitely against it because the public utilities, like Columbia Water and Sewer, we want to be able to choose whether we put ductile iron down there or whether we put PVC down there, and we will put PVC when it's cheaper and it's appropriate conditions, and we will put ductile iron when it's the appropriate conditions, and it may be more expensive, but we're not going to have to dig it up in 5 years to repair it because it was not the appropriate condition for PVC. We fought this battle for 4 years now, and I have every anticipation that we're going to fight it again next year. And we're just trying to save our money from having to go litigate all these costs in the future if we are if it goes through. Another comment to make is that the argument of the American Chemistry Council on this is that the local governments have these institutional sort of good old boy systems where they've just been doing the same thing forever, and they're married to the ductile iron industry, and they don't want to take a fresh look and try to change things to save money for their citizens. And so you get a little traction with that. At the legislature in South Carolina, there are a number of places where you can get traction on kind of the don't trust those local governments line. And that's where they get traction, and we've so far been successful in not having them pass that bill. Okay. This is the same issue we've talked about for a number of years. We got this issue farther this year than we have in the past. And we've got a plan to try to get it a little bit farther this coming year. The issue is when the city of Columbia has to spend money on a property, let's say we have to spend $7,000 to go in and demolish a home that's either a health or safety risk. Today we can put a lien on the property, but if they don't ever sell the property, we can't get the lien until the property sells. But we can't get the money back any sooner than that. All we can do is put a lien on the property. What we would like to be able to do is to put it on the tax bill, put that amount on the tax bill so that the person has to pay it when their taxes come due the next year so that we get reimbursed and they keep their property. The state law is ambiguous in whether it gives counties the ability to do that. So we're trying to work this from a municipal, we were trying to work it from a different angle until this past year. In this past year, we joined with the county association to try to pass a law that would clarify that counties can do this. The law was written in a way that the county association had a good reason for, but I didn't think it was as good as it could have been written. So I'm talking with the county association now about writing that law in a different way so that it avoids some of the issues that the property rights advocates have. The property rights advocates in the South Carolina legislature are alive and strong. So they are our hurdle on this issue and on in our next issue. I'm sorry, the word just went out of. If we could.
How does 833 apply to municipalities as well as only counties?
Annexation is the other way. I'm sorry.
Does it apply to cities as well?
It does not apply to cities, because if we try to make it apply to cities, it's DOA. So what we're trying to do is to make it apply to counties, because what we need counties to have the clear authority to put these liens on a person's tax bill every year. If the county can do it, then the county would have the discretion to also accept that same thing from a city that's also in the county. So we have to get the county language clear before we can get the local government in.
I'm assuming when you say discretion, you were just throwing that out, but if the county is granted the authority to do that, then they should automatically accept, I guess, complaints or referrals from the city, from a municipality. That's the only way they would know that property is derelict.
And Scott, yes, they should. And
Right.
Scott Slatton at the Municipal Association and I have worked extensively with the Counties Association, and they assure us that if we get this language passed that clearly gives counties the authority to do this, that we will not have a problem, at least in the city of Columbia, we will not have a problem with doing exactly what you said. So the bill was drafted with language that was copied over from another part of the code, and that language that was copied over did not, it raised the concerns of the property rights crowd. And their concerns are this. We don't want some local government to identify, we don't want the city of Columbia, and they don't necessarily point out the city of Columbia. They just say any local government. We don't want them to have some clean team that goes up and says that Mr. Jones' yard out on Garner's Ferry has just strewn with junk all over the yard. And so they sent a clean team in there because everybody in the neighborhood complained that Mr. Jones had toys and old tractors, and the guy was a hoarder and had stuff all over his yard. So the city sent a clean team in there, and then they put a $2,500 bill on Mr. Jones' tax bill next year. And we say, we agree with that. We have that concern too.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to health and safety. If it's a crack house, if there's vermin in the yard, if there's something else. I mean, when I say a crack house, I mean if there are homeless people living in a house that's otherwise unoccupied. If it's being used for some kind of illicit activity, there's a health and safety risk. You know, it needs, but not just to clean up somebody's junky yard.
But that's part of it.
That's that's.
I don't feel strongly about this at all.
That is.
This is good.
That is heavily weighted right now in terms of what this city has to do, and we put liens. We're functioning as yard men and landscapers and junk men hauling things away if they don't do it. So somebody has to pay for that.
I think this is great. Obviously, we'd support it whichever way it's drafted. I think it's also just important to make it clear that we are also property rights supporters.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
But obviously, I think even as we articulate that to others at the State House, that we support that as well, but we recognize the larger responsibilities to the wider community. And so let's just make sure we don't position ourselves vis-a-vis property rights advocates, because we are as well. So.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time assuring people that we're not taking property. That's not what we want to do. But there's a certain degree of responsibility and impact on negligence of property owners. Impact my property and her property in terms of value. The less values properties have, the less the county is able to collect also. Anyway, we
Right. I mean, there's parts of the state that we could all, outside of the city of Columbia, I'm thinking of now, there are parts of the state where if we were able to put, if you were trying to send in people to clean up that part of the state, you'd have to have 15 crews for 3 years to clean up half the properties in the county look terrible, And so the idea that if a local government wants to go spend their money, I'm telling you what the State House, the general view in the State House is, if a local government wants to go spend their money on that, that's fine, they can do that all day long. But we don't want to have every property owner in this state getting tagged with $1,200 here, $1,500 there, $900 there every year because somebody decided that they needed, that the grass was a little bit too high or they had one too many washing machines in their front yard. Now, if it's health and safety, that's a different. They don't have any problem with spending the money. They have a problem with putting it on their tax bill, and then they lose their property the next year because their tax bill was so high,
Kyle, as this continues with the drafting, I would encourage you to work with our staff, code enforcement staff, et cetera, maybe even community development staff on like federal definitions of blight and quality of life and what constitutes particularly if there's been repeat offenses, issues of quality of life for the surrounding neighborhood and blight in the neighborhood. So I think there's some other parts to this that maybe we need to help you include language-wise.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Mr. Bedore was also asking about income tax. Has that ever been looked at as an approach versus property tax, the property tax bill?
That way you're leaving the property owners or whoever is protecting their personal property, because I think that's what they do in hospitals. If you don't pay your hospital bill, they put a lien on your tax returns that you'll pay the hospital bill first before you get a dime back in refund.
It's a set-off debt program.
Yeah.
We have something like that, set-off debt program.
I'm just asking.
I'll check into that. I was thinking, I don't think that's been discussed.
That will eliminate the
taking.
Right.
The property taker, the property, personal property.
I'm familiar with the program.
And you wouldn't hurt the property values around, or anything like that. I think it's directed to the owner itself.
Okay. More? Just as a question, what's a ballpark number for the amount of money the city spends on a property, that would be, where we would have money to put on a county?
Before the lawsuit, after the lawsuit?
Before.
We can get you that.
4 figures?
We can get you that.
3 figures?
We can get you.
5 figures?
And it actually could be less, but it could be less if we have the ability to do it ahead of time. Because I mean, I think some of those are just, it gets so bad that the cost ends up being up there.
And we
But
have to
if
go
we're
in.
able to do it
Yeah, okay.
before it got out of hand, it would probably be less.
Okay.
We'll get you all of that, Kyle.
This is a bill that we got a long way this year, but we didn't get it passed. This is a bill that will allow a portion of hospitality and accommodations taxes to be used to make infrastructure repairs from flooding. Okay, the easy thought here is Charleston and Myrtle Beach with sea level rise and the amount of money that they're having to spend to deal with sunny day floods and other associated issues. When the issue came up, there were a contingency of legislators who wanted to limit it to just Horry County and Charleston, and there were the rest of us who were saying you're not going to do that because we've got a canal sitting down here that we've got to spend tens of millions of dollars on at least to fix that, and so we've got flood issues too, as do other areas of the state. The bill broke down over the argument of whether it would apply to just those 2 counties or whether it would also apply to all the other 44 counties. So we're going to be working on that again this next year. That bill has that bill has kind of taken the place of that capital projects improvement tax bill that the municipal association was leading on for a couple of years but never really got traction. So this has sort of become the main revenue bill that the municipal association is pushing, which we'll see in a minute. This is a bill that was of great interest to the city of Columbia and to a lot of nonprofit organizations here in the city that are struggling to provide as much low-income housing as possible. And it would have given tax relief to housing properties that were owned by nonprofit housing corporations. This bill, again, advanced into the legislative process, but broke down in the Senate over disagreement on how it would be applied. And then at the end of the day, they just decided to quit working on it because they couldn't reach an impasse over their disagreements over how the bill would be applied. I think that bill will be back again this next year because of how far it went. We'll see.
And this is different than the tax exemption that's given to a typical LIHTC project. I mean, they pay lower property taxes already. This is separate and apart from maybe a 9%.
They're looking for
Would be
an
like-
exemption.
No, this would be like,
The
correct me if
exemption.
I'm wrong, but this would be like if CHDC's property, they pay taxes on their property, so this would be, wouldn't this be exemption? They could apply and get their properties.
Any nonprofit housing corporation that own.
I'm not sure that we'd be in favor of that.
Well, I heard I would be happy to take instruction from the city and the council.
I think we ought to pull what was put up before and really go through it and talk about it, because we got a fine line balance of.
Other corporations as a nonprofit controlling partner. Remember?
Yeah, I mean, the addition part probably makes it a little bit broader, but, one of the things that has come up in our committee's discussion before we passed our ordinance was, it's the cost of building and then the cost of operating. So this would, if you had a nonprofit who, like
Cost of building.
like, Lala Anna, the development she's about to do. Yeah, if the taxes end up being,
She doesn't pay taxes.
does she, that's what this would do, right? She does pay taxes, she pays property tax, she pays property taxes.
I'm sorry,
On the properties that she owns, like St. Lawrence Place
Do we
stuff,
pay property tax?
they take property.
Their organization,
Let's ask the
I mean,
expert.
is their organization a
I would
nonprofit?
think so, though.
Yeah, but
So
they have to pay on their
say
property.
with, when I was with development corporations, we actually were able to file for tax exemption simply because we were a 501c3. We were able to do that.
So one of the things we gotta be careful with is making sure that that's a balanced, because you don't want a large development to fall under that for multiple reasons.
But y'all
So
have
this
to
says,
file. This would
Yeah, they
make it
have to,
automatic.
yeah,
this,
this, yeah, they
so
have
this
to file
basically says if
something.
someone, if there's a project that comes to you and someone who's traditionally been exempted owns 51% of the LLC or partnership, then there's no tax liability to even the private
I think that
members.
part
Private
was-
side, right?
Wasn't it added?
100%.
I don't remember it, the hell, the LLCs, but, who is it, Jeff, cause how did this come up? Jeff Larimore was talking about this, I think Midlands Housing Trust Fund was interested in this, that's kinda how it came on our radar, and I asked Teresa to have, Kyle look at it, cause Jeff said this was something that Midlands Housing Trust Fund was interested in. And so he could
It's a way
probably
for
better
them to bring
explain
in
it.
private equity, and the equity doesn't end up with the tax liability.
I'm happy to,
So we can,
I'm happy to discuss further and
Maybe you could educate me a little more. I thought I knew.
Sounds like the
but now I
council would
don't
probably be
know.
supportive of like our development corporations or a homeless no more, but when that second bullet is added, we probably need to understand better how that, what the implications are for the private
That
sector.
starts to happen citywide.
Right.
We
Right.
miss out on taxes.
as I said, it extends it from if it's a nonprofit housing corporation, and then add it, yeah. Maybe have Jeff also look at, tell us what was their rationale for bringing this on their radar.
Or maybe not.
this is a more straightforward bill for community, well, of course, that's not saying anything, right?
For nonprofits.
This is for community development, certified community development organizations. Today, the South Carolina Association of Community Economic Development administers this program that gives people a 33% tax credit for any donations made to a certified organization, and they have $1 million to distribute every year. So when they hit that cap, which is sometime in February or March, they're done for the year. Similar to SCRA has the same kind of thing where you can donate up to $5 or $10 million to one of SCRA's funds.
Cause they need the money.
And you get a tax credit back from the state. This bill would have taken it from 33% tax credit with a cap of $1 million in tax credits up to $5 million and over a 3-year phase-in period. So they were trying to take, and the tax credits would go up to 100% contributed. And the 100% of that was, this is something that I received some phone calls on, and people wanted to support it if we could, and let's see what we can do. And this was the second year they tried this, and it got momentum this year, but they didn't quite get the authority from the Ways and Means in the House and Senate Finance to take it up to the $5 million over a 3-year phase-in. I think that this bill will be back this next year. In fact, I'm almost positive. And
Yeah,
think
I know I've personally supported this in the past, at least the raising of the cap. I'm trying to remember what I did, and you may know better than I do on terms of the credit, but I still think obviously at least parity for what we do for SCRA should work for a good solid community development. That's just.
I'm surprised that the SCRA thing has survived and has not had more criticism. Because when you give $1,000 donation to something, and you get $1,000 tax credit back from that, you get the value of that tax credit to put on your tax bill when you pay DOR every year, because it's state tax credit. But then you also get the value of the donation on your federal form. So you actually give them $1,000 and you get more than $1,000 back. And I've been surprised that has persisted, and that's what these guys were asking for. I don't want to speak for them or make their arguments for them, but I think that they would, if they came back at 50%, they would be fine. This was sort of the let's start at the top and negotiate down sort of offer that they had. But until the House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee give them the authority to spend that extra money, because as Senator Leatherman always says, $1 million that I give a check for is the same as $1 million that I don't get in the first place. So as soon as they give them that authority, then I think that they'll be able to get to the $5 million over 3-year phase-in period, and the 33% may go up. It probably won't go up to 100%, but it'll probably go up somewhere in there.
These are pieces of legislation that didn't pass.
These are legislation that did not pass, but we expect it to be
Because
back
the
next year.
legislature is adjourned, they're gonna have to be reintroduced next year.
Right, which is why I'm talking about what I expect to be reintroduced. I don't expect.
And it's a 2-year session this year.
This is the second of a 2 years. Yeah, we start new, just like
For
Congress.
next year.
We start swearing in. We have swearing. Well, we already had swearing in at the legislature, but the Senate doesn't start new, but the session starts new. So all the bills from last year are dead.
But the new session is also a 2-year session.
Correct. Yeah, 2 years. I do not expect to see that business license tax bill reintroduced, for example. I do expect to see this bill reintroduced. This is the Municipal Tax Relief Act. I don't. This one probably will not be reintroduced. This was tried for 2 years, and there was just no traction on it for a variety of reasons. We've talked about it the last 2 years. Would have provided local option sales tax of up to 1%, but I think we would have already been capped in the city of Columbia, so we would have had to have reduced one of our other local option sales taxes that we already have. 20% of it had to go to mandatory property tax rollback. I think Mr. Rickman asked last year whether that was business or residential, and the answer was whatever the city wanted to do. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It didn't pass, and I don't think it's going to be back this next year. It's not a terrible idea. It was really being pushed by Horry County and people in Myrtle Beach who have a lot of costs that they have to pay every year, and they have a whole lot of human beings in their county, and most of them don't live there. So they're trying to figure out a way to pay for a lot of those costs with something like this. Like Columbia, right. Annexation is the other one that we've talked about with the property tax rights crowd. We are going to try again this next year to get an annexation bill out of committee. Okay. Animal control shelters. We put this up here because this has been something that we've spent a fair amount of work on, because there have been a lot of attempts to do things that would have good impacts and adverse impacts on the City of Columbia animal shelter. And there was a bill passed 2 years ago that took care of the big issues that the animal control groups, the animal rights groups, the animal care groups had. This year, this was sort of mop-up legislation that was introduced in 2017 and in 2018, and it didn't get addressed. And the reason it didn't get addressed is because most of their most pertinent concerns were taken care of in 2016 after a lot of, or maybe in 2017 after like a 3-year effort. And the City of Columbia was content. We were content after we worked a number of changes into the bill that ultimately passed. That bill was a good bill for us, or I should say it wasn't a bad bill for us. This is a very quick slide. City of Columbia took an action. The state legislature said we oppose that action. The President of the United States said I'm in favor of that action. The legislature of South Carolina said we're fine with it too. Municipal court reporting. I put this on here because it's likely to be an issue going forward. And we've been in touch with Dana on this to make sure Judge Turner, thank you.
She's gone.
Well, she was there back in the spring when we talked to her.
She was.
Okay.
I
So-
I need to make the introduction for you.
Yeah,
to
good.
the court administrator.
So we'll work with the court administrator. We got her perspectives on this bill when it came out. This bill is a bill to address the Charleston loophole, as they call it, what happened in 2015 with Dylan Roof. And it is dealing with the reporting of activities at local governments, local municipal courts and state courts and magistrate courts, and how they get reported to SLED and who keeps the registry. And so the issue is going to be back because this system is antiquated, and it's 2018, and there's technology out there to make the system work better. And so, and I'm not saying we're behind other states. We're not necessarily behind other states, but just in life in general, the way that we report crimes in this state and the way that we report actions that have taken place by law enforcement officers and by courts is very willy-nilly. Some of them report them daily, some of them report them 3 times a week, some of them report them weekly, some of them report them by hand, some of them report them by electronically. It's not well coordinated. So there's an effort put forward to try to make this a better system over time. What we wanted to make sure of was that there was not an outsized burden placed on our courts by what they were asking for in this bill. At the end of the day, the bill did not pass because the people who are opposed to the gun rights crowd was opposed to the shortening of, they were opposed to what the bill would have done to the rights of the person trying to buy a gun and the background checks associated with that. So when I talked to Senator Kempson about this bill after he introduced it, he said, we need to get the language in this on the reporting right. He said, but this bill is probably not going to pass this year because the gun rights crowd is going to shoot it down. Pardon the pun, I didn't mean to say that. This bill is not going to pass this year because the gun rights crowd is not happy with tightening up how we deal with the reporting matters that led to Dylan Roof being able to buy a gun. And not that they're in favor of Dylan Roof getting a gun, they're just in favor of not having more constraints on people buying guns. So it didn't pass this year, but we're going to continue to deal with this because the whole system needs to be tightened up. Had they not had the provision in there that would have required a longer wait, I think today, somebody can correct me on this. I think today, if you go to buy a gun and they ask the system if the person is allowed to buy the gun, if the system doesn't give them a response within either 48 hours or 72 hours, or the system's response is don't know, then the person could buy the gun. And so this would have modified that, and I don't know exactly how. But separate and apart from that, the reporting of crimes to SLED needs to be streamlined and modernized. So we'll be working on that.
These last two, well, particularly the next one is very relevant, Kyle, for some conversations that the council is having. If you can quickly go through these last two, and then we'll wrap up with the
The last two
proposed-
issues.
Yeah, the
Okay, good.
proposed, priorities.
Good. Okay. Right. So if council is familiar with the issue, it's fairly self-explanatory. The community charge was proposed by Rutherford. I don't think that this bill got a lot of traction. It got a lot of attention, but I don't think that it got a lot of traction because the people who would have had to have paid the community charge were quick to oppose. And it's always easier to not do something than to do something in terms of passing legislation when there's opposition. You can see the alcohol licenses. I think everyone's familiar with that bill, and I think everyone's familiar with that issue. The bill got introduced. I think that Senator Harpootlian is going to be pushing hard for something like this next year. I'm not sure.
This would remove the restriction, or Putin would be pushing in the opposite direction.
Okay, I'm sorry. My bad. I'm sorry. Right.
Either way, it's not going anywhere.
I think.
I mean, that's the reality, because you got one senator on one side and one, and we all know it only takes one to kill it, so it's dead. Now, what they ought to do is sit down and craft something that makes sense so there's no gray area. And I would hope we would encourage them to do that instead of both battling each other.
Well, the big point here is that this restriction is not in the state law, it's in the state constitution. And in order to remove what Russell Lott wanted to do with this piece of legislation, you'd have to get an amendment to the state constitution, which is 2/3 votes of the House and Senate and a referendum statewide.
Well, I think you could go in and you could change the definition of what on alcohol license, so you could create a bar and some other things, some other categories without having to change the constitution. Which is part of the problem is we only got one designee.
I'm betting on Harpo.
If you find there's any interest in H 4800 for that, please let us know that,
Okay.
Kyle, because, you know, council's having to look at some novel approaches for
pay.
for the non-taxable entities in our city.
Right. Okay. Oh. Did we hand it out? Did you get the handout? Yes. Okay. This was just released over the weekend. Actually, we found it on the website yesterday morning, which we usually have it before we do put this packet together. The Municipal Association has really streamlined this year to just 3 priorities. They usually have 8 or 10. Local government fund, updating the local government fund formula, as I talked about earlier, so that it recognizes where we are and tries to reset and go forward from there. The proposal that's been made by the county association would be that the local government fund would go up each year, up a maximum of 5%, but we would go up at the same amount, the same percentage that recurring revenue goes up each year.
Same money they steal by proviso every year? Is that what you're saying?
They strip it out of the local government fund by proviso.
Have you ever taken a firm position asking them to stop doing that?
Oh, yeah, every year. And they you know, Brian, this is a Brian White thing. This is a Brian White thing, and the Senate just kind of goes along with what the House does on this. Okay. And then they kind of take the easy way out.
I'm gonna get you off track. You keep on trucking.
But the House has voted to change the way local government fund is done. They voted 2 years ago. I don't think they did this last year. They voted 2 years ago for a bill that would make these changes, and the Senate just said, "Thank you very much. We'll just leave it the way it is," and they put the same money in there, and on forward we went. So they just don't have a meeting of the minds on it. And there was more back and forth between the House and the Senate last year than usual. I'm going to try to move forward quickly here. The second one is expand flexibility for the this is what we talked about earlier, being able to use accommodation tax and hospitality tax for infrastructure and law enforcement and tourist-related areas. And then the other one, it comes from the Municipal Association's work with the Criminal Justice Academy on trying to get people there for their training sooner than they are able to go to now. These are the proposed priorities for the City of Columbia for the coming year. I'll run through them very quickly. Local government fund, funding for secure state funding for city projects. You guys saw the other night that we, with Senator Scott's lead, we were able to get some money for the Alita Street or Harlem Heights project, which was very good for us. There should be other money similar to that hopefully available this coming year, not necessarily for that project. I'm just saying we should be able, we should have an open door to go try to find money for these local projects.
Sure.
The canal would be.
And I have had a conversation.
Going, I just want
Yeah,
you to-
good. We're all over the canal, and I've had a conversation, and we can discuss where we are on that.
The next time we publicly talk about that kind of relationship, I think we ought to make sure that we kind of show number-wise also where the city was actively participating in terms of the dollars. We kind of didn't, I think, adequately acknowledge staff's involvement. That's not your fault.
Oh, no, I understand. I understand. Yeah, no, the state, but we were happy to have all the state's help that we could. And the city's done a great job on that project because I've seen all the paperwork on it for the last 3 years. Utility relocation, which is we are continuing to work on making sure that we are not paying, that we are paying as few of the costs of Carolina Crossroads and others as possible. Pension plan reimbursement. This is the next one is one of the municipal association's priorities, which is supporting, this is being able to use hospitality and accommodations taxes for flooding in tourist-related areas. Blighted property, annexation, piping material. The next one, we can put a hold on that until we figure out what we want to do on that. We can put that one in abeyance of tax exemption for property devoted to low-income housing. SCASED's effort to increase the tax credit. Municipal, we put that bullet in there when we drafted this 3 weeks ago before the municipal association's priorities were out. And then the other one is we expect something to come up on ethics. We don't expect to have a lot of lobbying on that, but we want to let everyone know how it will affect. We just don't want it to be overly burdensome on a local government. We'll monitor animal welfare. I don't expect anything else on that. I don't expect anything else on business license tax. Summer day camp programs did not come back this last year. It's a licensing issue that would have greatly burdened our summer camps. Municipal court reporting, we will monitor to see what happens. Alcohol licensing requirements, we will monitor that and come back to council as the city manager on that. And then that's all of it.
Can we add, since there's $1 billion worth of surplus and about 450 million of it's going to be reoccurring from now on, that maybe they return that to either the cities or to the taxpayers so we get some relief?
Well, and that's the local government fund.
Yeah.
And
right, a specific request to that effect. I think we talked about maybe the property tax exemption for housing low-income residents. I think philosophically it's something we support. The way that bill is structured gives you some reason for pause. I'd much rather take the approach that we're taking here as a city, pushing for mixed-use, mixed-income housing. I didn't get a sense from the body, maybe you did, on the SCASED tax credit cap for community economic development organizations. I'd like to see the cap go up. I'm not sure if 33% to 100% is the way we need to go, but 6 one way, half dozen the other.
Right, and I think just supporting an increase of the cap would support increased donations to those community economic development organizations in Columbia.
Yeah. But I may be on the record supporting the whole kit and caboodle. I don't remember. You have to find. And obviously we've been doing our best to manipulate existing state laws, particularly multi-county industrial park, to meet more urban purposes over the last several years. Should we go ahead and just push for something that the courts have ruled in our favor, so that's good. But start pushing for more policy changes. I think Tamika was talking about in the Economic Development Committee earlier today that Mo and I couldn't talk at. But just being much more specific on putting more tools into the toolbox that speak to the needs of cities, as opposed to just our traditional events, manufacturing.
It's not helping us.
Yeah. So just some additional tools in our toolbox.
We need some quivers.
Yeah, we need more. We need more, and it's not going to happen unless we put something forward. So we just need to put some. Man, honestly, Teresa, it's looking at the stuff that we're already doing.
Yeah.
and not operating on the
Codified.
on the periphery, just getting some horses up there that can advance our agenda a little more aggressively. So.
That was one of the, if I'm remembering correctly, of the municipal association. I'm surprised it didn't make its way back on.
Should there be a
Which
gradation?
one?
Should there be a
Tools, like for cities.
should there be a tool? And this is really just it's the first time I've ever thought this or said it, so it sounds crazy. But should there be a tool for cities across the state, not just us, think about places like Beaufort, I assume Harris Island may be within city limits, might be county. But cities that host a significant amount of public entities. I mean, our city, for example, hosts the University of South Carolina to the benefit of the entire state. We host the state government to the benefit of the entire state. We host Fort Jackson for the benefit of the entire world here. I mean, are there some additional incentives that maybe a sliding scale for municipalities and or counties, I don't know, that fit different, that maybe 10% or 20%, we've seen numbers that suggest that 40 to 63% of our real estate may be tax exempt for one reason or another. I mean, something that would make sense to even the least rational observer. But go ahead and just put some ideas on the table that might appeal to folks of different political philosophies that might work for us. And find a horse and see if we got one in the House and one in the Senate, we might be able to advance the idea. Because my guess is, based on just the DNA of the state, we get it the worst, but there are a whole lot of communities around the state that have significant public sector investment. Sumter, probably, I'm not sure if Shaw is in city limits there or other places, so Sumter. I mean, so just start thinking a little more creatively about some additional tools that might work for urban areas or cities.
And if we went down that path, I would want to look at streams of funding, if there are any, that flow from us back to the state, that we could deduct that from, as opposed to creating a stream of funding from the state directly to us. Only because
if it inures our bottom line,
right,
in a real way,
right,
that Mr. Palin and Ms. Wilson have a way to actually spend it on real needs, then so be it. But
maybe working with Representative Rutherford or whomever else was advocating with him for something. I mean, I think he was making an attempt there. It didn't have the traction, and I think there was.
I'm talking about something additive to it, some sort of in addition to that, but something that's very clear and just common sense. Because once you kind of talk people through the DNA of what makes up our city, then people get it. You take our property owners and you mix that with Act 388, you get a really interesting, challenging cocktail that makes it difficult for commercial interest to pro forma here. And I think we just got to start putting some ideas out and getting some real champions in the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle who can advance those ideas.
How much would Act 388 reform of the business property tax, real property tax, how much would that have an impact if there were relief there?
Yeah, I don't know. The reality is that everybody, the entire state is dealing with the challenges around 388, I'd never handicap that changing any time in our respective lifetimes. But what can we do about the other pieces of the puzzle that at least recognize the influence of public sector bodies on our tax base? We got
I think, yeah, I know, we need to move on. I want to be respectful of the time of the council.
Yeah, we can
But
talk
we can
further about
definitely
it
have discussions
in the
about this.
upcoming sessions that they are gonna have on this subject. That might give you a little more perspective on where they're trying to go.
Good. I would like to be in attendance.
You're $600 million a year. on
What's
this
your last slide?
Streamline sales tax thing.
Dates?
That'll be an increase in our, we need to get it part of the.
One of the things that I thought we, initially what we were trying to do in this area was it made sense. Everybody can pretty much see and understand the financial impact. obviously that doesn't work, and we obviously don't have a particular tool. Do we know what other municipalities in our condition have done to kind of figure out, yeah, other states
There are a couple of,
that we,
Greenwood has a.
but we still, if you say Greenville,
Greenwood.
you're still in South,
Greenwood.
but you're still in South
Trenton,
Carolina.
Trenton, New Jersey, and a few other places have you know,
Right.
either worked with their state governments or, I mean, New Haven, I think Yale at one point paid some fees. It runs a gamut.
Yeah, we've got to, I guess, end up getting the blessings from the state.
Yeah,
So,
not necessarily.
well, that's my point. So I'm interested in what other folks have done to kind of wiggle something out of the
Greenwood
effort.
and Greenwood are the two best examples.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll talk. And you and Clint were kind enough. I talked about it when Senator Scott spoke the other day. Pulled together the information as everything we were doing on Leader Street. I'll get that to Mr. Davis and you need to mail it out to your constituents.
I saw it. Yeah.
All right.
Help him
Thank you,
more.
Kyle.
Let's give it to him.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Oh, shade.
Ask if he wanted to do it. Kyle, thank you so much. I wanted to thank Juana.
I forgot to mention one.
Well, no, I mean, Juana really helps Kyle and Ralph and all of the staff and communicating back and forth with them. So we appreciate you, Juana. And Mayor, while you before you came in, your colleagues decided they do want to put together a trip to Washington this year, and particularly on some of the issues Kyle put before us, like advocating for infrastructure funds for the canal, et cetera. If that becomes an opportunity, and I highly suggest you all do that. As he said, y'all are the best lobbyists for us, and if I could get Juana to work with you, Deborah and Ralph, on some dates that would work for the delegation members, because they like to do it outside of the NLC legislative conference, Mayor, so that they're not competing for time.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's rock and roll.
Okay, and census, they were very much so willing to discuss that during your retreat, but also coming up with an aggressive plan for census 2020.
We need, quite frankly, we need to appropriate some local money because Commerce is not devoting resources to standing up our own individual complete count effort here locally. Baltimore's doing some great work in some other places too, but it's only going to happen if we do it.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ralph.
Safe
Good
travel.
to see you. Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, our next presentation is on Amplify and the Columbia Compass. Our update to you all, Ms. Margie Reese with MJR Partners, the principal for that company, is here visiting with us, and I know she's visited with many of you already. Margie?
Thank you for waiting for me, Ms. Margie.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Good afternoon, council members, Mr. Mayor, Madam City Manager. I'm happy to be back in Columbia. I seem to be spending quite a bit of time here.
Good.
You'll remember late January of this year, we kicked off our cultural planning process. And since that time have continued to work with your own planning department staff so that we could make sure that the comprehensive plan, which this is a component of, and our findings are intersecting so that as we together come down to final recommendations, the arts work that we will be recommending will have as many opportunities to partner with other areas of the city as possible. So I thought it would be important for us at this point, as we're closing out about 11 months of just inquiry and community conversations, to just give you an update on what we're hearing and what we're finding. We're not at the point yet of making hard recommendations for you. There are some ideas that are coming to play, but we're at a point where I thought you might want to just digest what we've been hearing from the public and ask any questions so that as we go forward, we can make sure to keep those questions in mind. I'm going to step out this way a little bit. So as you know, this part of our work is connected to the Columbia Compass Plan. And just so you'll know, for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet face-to-face, I'm Margie Reese. I've talked to some of you on the phone and met with others. I live in a little state called Texas. You might have heard of it. And have been working in the area of arts administration professionally for about 40 years. It is a career path. And have been general manager for both the City of Dallas's Office of Cultural Affairs and the City of Los Angeles. And following that, worked for the Ford Foundation as a grant maker in West Africa. So a lot of the work that we're hearing over this last year is going to benefit from all of that experience, but even more importantly, our ability to just be patient and listen so that we can create a specific Columbia plan for you. I don't know if I'm doing this right. How come I'm not all on the screen? But there we go. Thank you. I just want to state simply that the goal, the objective of Amplify Columbia, which is the city's plan, arts plan, is to identify the most effective and efficient way for the city to respond to cultural development. This is not necessarily a plan that's going to just think about the hot tax fund or arts education, but on a very comprehensive level, what should the city's role be going forward in arts and cultural development? I also want to say that we started first looking at the city's vision statement, where the city says it wants to go. And so by the year 2036, as we talk to community groups, we've been talking to them with that destination in mind. That this isn't a short-term Band-Aid kind of conversation, it's a vision process. And to help us look at all of these areas, there are several different bodies in the community that we've been relying on. So the city contracted with One Columbia to produce this cultural plan. One Columbia contracted with MJR Partners through a review process. We have working with us as advisors then the board of One Columbia, a steering committee that's made up of a cross-section of Columbia residents, from educators to artists and arts organizations, but also to members of the philanthropic community, the Chamber of Commerce, business community, etc., neighborhood associations. And then the second tier of advisors that we have working with us is a group that we call thought leaders. And there are folks that work inside of neighborhoods and communities that are just, we meet with them every time we come to say, what do you think? Here's what we're hearing. Any new advice you can give us? Who else should we be talking to? What are we missing? And then the final group that's been advising us is a group of artist facilitators. They're Columbia resident artists that we engage to go into communities and neighborhoods and have conversations that might be more difficult for an outsider to have. And artists, as you know, can lower people's anxieties and engage them in conversation. So we're looking with all of that advice and with our planning structure, we're looking at all of these areas as we talk about arts and culture in Columbia. So to date, as we are still standing, we've engaged over 1,000 citizens in direct conversations in the planning process. We've held about 90 town hall and community conversations in all these areas and including all these individuals that you see on this list. And for the survey that just closed on the Amplify Columbia website, we collected over 400 responses. So we're feeling pretty good about community awareness and about our ability to get a broad range of thought. We're going to replace this map with a little bit more sophisticated one that has come from the planning department, but just wanted to show you where our footprint has been so far across the city. I want to just go quickly through the top themes that we've been hearing, so areas or chapters for recommendations that may be a part of the ultimate plan. The first one has to do with leadership. And this is a really broad bucket conversation. So it talks about leadership among the existing city-funded cultural organizations, their capacities, their strengths, and areas where they need some continued growth. It looks at leadership in the neighborhood level. So churches, for example, may be a leadership voice in a neighborhood they are the culture keepers of that neighborhood's culture and those traditions. And we're also looking at future leadership. We're doing a really quick desk study to see the average length of service for an executive director of a Columbia Arts organization, and it's looking like it's about 13 years. You've got some leaders who've been in their jobs for over 25 years, and some 2 years. So the spectrum of leadership is a concern that we want to focus on. And then also leadership transition. So how are the next generation of cultural managers being groomed and trained, and where are they getting good, solid business practices to run these organizations, and newer ones? Can I ask you to flip for me? Does that help me get it better? Okay. These are some of the things that arts leaders need to be fully aware of. They need to be connected to communities, connected to good trends and practices in arts business. They need to be good partners. So these are the trends around leadership that we're focusing in on. So this is more than just the voice that you hear at a council meeting that says we want more money. This is about how to grow and sustain strong cultural institutions for your city. The other theme that's arising in our conversations is about spaces. Where are the facilities? We can identify those on the map. But also, where are there opportunities for spaces in neighborhoods where people live that are safe havens for children to participate in arts and culture? And these can be very non-traditional spaces, for example. It might be a pop-up space on the corner. It might be a partnership with a school. It might be a partnership with a library system. Or in some cities, these partnerships emerge as new development happens, and they are planned for as part of that development. So we're doing an inventory of existing spaces. We're looking at whether or not they are ADA accessible. We're identifying those areas of the city that lack our spaces, and then looking at underutilized city-owned property.
So, step back, just as you're doing the inventory of existing and performing, are you also looking at its utilization?
Yes. Particularly those spaces that are not located downtown. Because there are some opportunities maybe for combining the use with other properties and other programs. We think about non-traditional spaces. We're thinking about shared spaces for incubators, for example. I won't read all of these, you can take a look at them. But what we're hearing from neighbors and residents, and these are non-arts organization voices, for example. These are this is your population. People are saying, for example, if I live in a public housing complex, I live in a very restricted area where transportation could be a problem. I need my children to have access to arts activities in those kinds of areas. We're looking at the cultural heritage sites, not just in the city, but in the region also, to see where there are opportunities for artist residencies, for example, for short-term art programs. So we're not talking about building new spaces. We're talking about how do you use the inventory that you have now. This is just a couple of case studies to share with you. The top one actually is, in fact, a public housing community in Chicago that was being rehabbed. And so the housing department and the city worked together to create a number of units for artists to live, to have their homes, and then in return to provide arts and cultural programs for families and children in the complex, but also in the area of the community. So non-arts money helping to create responses to arts projects. And then, you know, outdoor spaces, how you think about developing new parks and green spaces. We hear a lot about, from the classroom teachers in the area, about the lack of opportunities for kids to go outside and play and learn to create in the environment. So we're thinking about those kinds of responses.
Well, that would be putting away the phone and the computer.
It might be. Or it might be using the computer outside to design new responses to environmental challenges. Valuing artists is a big conversation when we visited with the arts, the individual artists across the system, as well as artists who work in arts organizations. There was a lot of data about the seepage, about artists leaving Columbia, or they come for a short time, they get training or they get jobs, but they don't stay. So our inquiry went another level deeper to try to understand why that was happening. And what we're hearing from artists are issues that I can assure you are national issues that have to do with individual artists. Integrating artists into the operations of the city, that they feel like they have something to offer. So how can artists be embedded in problem solving? Safety, community neighborhood safety, for example. How can artists be a part of those conversations? Healthcare issues, promoting Columbia's art makers more aggressively. They felt like, the artist community felt like they were invisible. Are there opportunities for more long-term artist fellowships? So we have a list of things that we've heard that from the artists that will wrap some thinking around about how do we keep, grow, and expand the knowledge base of the artists that live here in Columbia. This whole idea of enterprise and artists live workspaces, studio spaces for artists to sell their work to the public. So a lot of input around that that we will come back to you with some recommendations for. This was a really big conversation, arts, learning, and mastery. As we talked to K-12 teachers, to parents, and then to parent groups inside of neighborhoods who represent culturally distinct backgrounds. They want their kids to participate in creative learning, number one. This is not necessarily arts in school. This is arts and culture, and arts responding to the 21st century learning skills that kids need to be successful. So this is a big deal. I hope you can see some of this slide. I'll just talk about the high points. This is what we heard in all of our conversations about what parents and families want for their children. This cuts across every socioeconomic, culture, race. Everybody wants the same kinds of things for their kids. Emotional and physical well-being. They want kids to be innovative thinkers. They want them to master their academic work, to be engaged in civil society, and to take responsibility for themselves. Now, these are obviously turned into bureaucratic words that Margie Reese uses, but these are the things that families and parents say. We have some additional data to put into this slide that we heard last night, actually, from just a really rich conversation that we had with the Latino members from the Latino community. And they're also thinking about their children sort of being bicultural, and they want to make sure that their indigenous culture is preserved so that they understand their own traditions, but they also learn how to move into this community and the society that they found themselves in. So the arts play a part in all of that. And how do we bring back recommendations for you that could encourage empathy and positive self-esteem, etc.? That's our charge.
So when you had these conversations with these families, what was their commitment? Because so far, I've heard a lot of what we need to do, but I haven't heard what the commitment is from families. They have a responsibility as well, and for all of these to be successful, there has to be a partnership. And unfortunately, in the past, it's been the tendency for the city to have to carry 100%, and that's why programs don't get successful. Right. Because you don't have the buy-in from the community, the parents, and so, you know, I haven't heard any of that. And
you haven't heard that because we haven't asked that question yet. We need to find out first what is the broadest landscape of service that the public is looking for, so that Columbia as a whole is stronger in providing arts and cultural as we go back to the community in February with a series of recommendations based on what they've said to us, that'll be a better time for us to say, if there are 10 things on this list, how many of these things can happen in the private sector? How many can happen in neighborhoods and churches? In fact, maybe one or two environments we were able to ask about what you would bring to the table, but that hasn't been our line of questioning so far.
Well, it will be key, because
Yes,
all
I
of this
agree.
will be lost if you don't, if it's not a, you know, community-driven together for a success rate. Yes,
So
ma'am.
right now, we're getting from the community what's the big picture, right? And your point is not one that we will take lightly. We'll take it to heart. Thank you. History and heritage is another theme that's rising to the top. Columbians feel that the history, their tangible history, buildings, iconic spaces of the city need preservation, but also need interpretive work so that new generations of Colombians can understand that background history. But also we need to think about how do we reshape the current structures for bringing new people to the table that are going to be responsible for this legacy. So as a generation changes, somebody's history is not embedded in a building on a corner. We need to make sure, to your point a bit, that we have some connection to that facility for new neighbors moving into it. Otherwise, it could disappear. Investment is another big area that we've been seeing and hearing. And this isn't just coming from people who want more money. This is looking at the cultural infrastructure. So buildings that exist, spaces that exist, the ways we have been funding and how you're using your current dollars to support the arts. What does that investment really look like? So to the average person, they look at how you provide grant money, where the money goes. We, in this case, want to think about a broader picture of investment for the arts in Columbia. I was not distracted, but I was just doing a quick study on my phone during this last conversation. Looking at, for example, money that Columbia is leaving on the table. That's not even coming into the city.
That raises their.
And let me just tell you what I quickly was finding. There's a grant program, there are several. This has to do with investment. I was just looking at the amount of money that the city of Charleston received from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2017. The city of Columbia. Not its arts organization.
City of
City of
Charleston.
Charleston. City of Charleston, not its arts group or its individual. The city received $50,000 for a public art project. $70,000 to support the city's Office of Cultural Affairs. This is from one federal funding source in 1 year. $15,000 to support a contemporary art installation. $36,000 to support arts education in the city. $10,000 for the Big Read program, the Big Book program that you guys probably do. And that doesn't include the $25,000 for the Spoleto Festival, et cetera, et cetera. These are grants that the city applied for. And I didn't have time, I probably should have thought about it sooner, and I went through this. There are 4 major arts funding agencies at the national level that invest in cities and in the arts and are responding to some of these things. Public art, arts in neighborhoods, building policy, looking at equity in grant making. The Institute for Museums and Library Services, there are a limited number of organizations that can apply for that funding, but local governments are one. And it is, in fact, the largest source of federal funding for arts and culture in the country. People think it's the NEA. NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, is the other one. And so the point is, when you think about investment, I know it's easy for you to go to the money out, but in investment, we also want to talk about investing in Columbia by requesting funding. You're also eligible for private sector funding, et cetera. So we want to see how we can increase the investment the pool of funds that support some of the elements of this plan. These are the things that are going to drive the implications for our recommendations. We have engaged the private sector. I think there's a huge implication for us. Looking at some of the recommendations that we'll make, we'll also make some suggestions about potential funding sources from the private sector. Developing a system for arts education, as we've been meeting with United Way, for example, Boys and Girls Club. So what our findings, I'm not going to go into these, aren't all going to be targeted at city government must do, right? They're going to be targeted at the city of Columbia as a whole. Public sector, private sector, philanthropic agencies. Who is the best partner to respond to some of these things? Generating a public art plan, for example. You've got some fabulous murals and public art plans in the city that exist right now, and artists are doing that. But what's the plan for that? Who's going to maintain them over time? How many murals do you need? How many international artists? How many local artists? You know, all those kinds of things. And then perhaps where are there opportunities for a larger footprint in the area of public art? And we're learning about some possibilities. Preserving the integrity and dignity of neighborhoods. How can we do that with non-arts money, but that protects the cultural integrity of your city? So that when people come to visit Columbia, they're coming to see what a good job you're doing handling your police and fire and safety. That's really critical. They all want to know that. They also want to know about the texture of the city. How are you protecting that? And what's the story of Columbia and the people that live here? And then finally, we're looking at the consideration for what's called a local arts agency. So who does all this work? Who solicits the grant for additional investment in the arts? Who manages a public art plan? How do artists get procured for doing projects in neighborhoods? What's the system? We need a system right now. So what's the system for doing that?
There seems to be a piece missing, and maybe I missed it and don't understand it. Maybe you can, but to me it seems that the art community is missing in this. What is their commitment? What is their investment? You got artists, you got art programs, you got all these people who, and you mentioned a lot of these directors who've been around for a long time. Where's their role in this? Because I haven't seen it yet, and maybe I missed it. So I'm curious how that fits into the weave that you're creating.
So many of the conversations that we've had have been focused specifically on the arts organizations, their needs, their budgets, etc. That is only one piece of the city of Columbia's arts and cultural footprint. So you keep asking about commitment. We'll probably come back to that. But right now, we're looking at what does the community, the taxpayer, the resident, school teachers, how do they interact with these arts organizations, for example? And then how do they define art? And what does cultural expression look like for them? So we may have a very strong roster of arts organizations, but if they're not meeting, servicing, and reflecting the people that live in Columbia, we've got to talk about how do we make those transitions and those shifts.
And I think it goes back to one of your first slides where the arts folks made all their comments of the things that they didn't feel like. But I think we have to ask the question the other way as well. What is your dedication? What is your commitment? Because it doesn't work if the two parties aren't working together.
Well, you're right.
Because right now, the perception is that a lot of people get a lot of funding. And so how do we make sure that, and I think that's where you're going to get to at some point, that we're deploying funding to really engage the most and get the most out of our community as a whole, not one-sided. So I'd be curious to see how that weaves in.
Yeah, and I'll be happy when we get to that point with you. We've looked at your application process, your evaluation process. How are you holding those who are getting these dollars accountable? And there's some gaps in that process. And so it's going to be a strong scotch at the right moment, but someone is going to have to say accountability is gonna need to look differently based on what the public says that they need. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you now. Because change moves at the speed of trust. And if the community isn't trusting the arts groups, and the arts groups aren't trusting the city, and the city isn't trusting the arts groups, then the city as a whole is handicapped. So we're gonna have to have more transparent fund seeking and grant making guidelines. We're gonna have to think about professional management of your cultural resources. Just like most cities across the country, the arts in mid-sized cities started out as community-based arts programs. So you do have directors who've been managing facilities from the Passion Place, and you're at a point in growth for Columbia where it needs to be managed at a planning place. What's our growth?
And I would probably say to that, you probably figured out we had the cultural council, then we have this, and we had that. There seems to be a lot of factions where maybe that is hurting us instead of helping us.
It may be. And the other thing is that you've got a lot of young artists that are gravitating to this city. And so traditional structures of arts management are not allowing enterprise to happen. And art making and cultural enterprise projects are really going to be the future. So we're going to have to look at how those grants are made. What are they made for? And that idea of investment. Money, new money has to come in so you can take better risks, bigger risks with some of these younger folks that are going to be attracting more people to the city. So I'm open. I think that's my last slide.
I do want to make a comment though. On the investment slide you had earlier, I wonder why is the University of South Carolina was not part of the discussion or part of the investment group. I think, you know, with the arts and the students, you know, they major in that might be a good tool and a good measurement in where the future of the art will be.
We actually have been meeting with the fine arts directors. A couple of them are on our steering committee, and then we had a very separate conversation with them. There is a very specific role for USC. Their student body is automatically a transient group setting. But the institution itself has some resources that could respond to some of the things that we're seeing, particularly on the leadership side. So when I've been meeting with a few of the council members, and I hear you ask for higher levels of accountability, better business practices, not-for-profit organizations operating more like a for-profit business. So the business school and your art school at USC are perfect partners for helping develop a response to that. But so is the philanthropic community. Right? So they also want to see that growth in administrative capacities. And so that perhaps might be a good link for USC. We visited with USC, help me somebody, Allen University, Columbia College, and Benedict College. So we have talked to those guys to make sure that whether or not their students are a part of the response, that their system, the institutional system, could be a response.
Ms. Devine and Mr. Davis.
So, thank you, Ms. Reese. I mean, I think it's very good. I mean, this is an update. There's another piece to this, but I think the work that's gone into this is good, and I look forward to seeing in the spring when we can get to some recommendations and some discussion around that. But as my question would be, looking forward to that next piece. The city of Columbia is just one piece. This is a cultural plan for the Columbia area. Has there been any conversations, and this might be either for you or for Larry or somebody else, but connecting the county and other resources, because the city can't fund everything, and as we move forward, some of these pieces would mesh better together if there was a collaborative effort to say this is a plan and this is the direction we want to move forward for this region.
Thank you for that question. We have been meeting with the county, Supervisor County, where are they here?
The interim manager.
As well as elected officials in the adjoining cities. So for Casey, for example, what are the connecting opportunities they're looking at? How can they benefit from this plan? And then how can this plan benefit for some of the needs and go forth that they have? The city of Columbia is our ultimate client. But we know that the porous nature of the city boundaries means that there are opportunities for cross the river and cross the road collaboration. So we will want to bring back some recommendations that can provide that joint funding. It'll require us keeping the city of Columbia as a primary focus, of course. But I think that, for example, in arts education and arts learning, out of school time, where kids are moving around almost from one city to the next every day. And then Columbia is the lead, and when one of the cities that we talk to, as Columbia goes, they're going to go. So I think you're going to see some natural partnerships arising. Because artists live here, they work there, and
I was just wondering, was your conversation, were they included, one, and number two, if the conversations were had, and they have been, was there the appearance of they were receptive to being part of this moving forward?
Overwhelmingly, yes, they're receptive because they too are looking at growth.
Davis?
I think this is needed, and I go back to the session we had with some of the artists at the print building. And moving forward, the message from that group, I think I heard, was that availability of resources for small and young artists that want to go into the business sector, the business part of the arts. I think that's going to be important, especially folks starting out, because I've seen a lot of starving artists. That's what they're known for. They don't have any money. And I go back to when I got started. My money came from the State Arts Commission. But I could not do and get started now like I did in the past because of the costs of my medium, especially in inner city. You have to deal with environmental issues and inspections and that sort of thing. And I think as we move forward, when we look at the funding sources that you've highlighted, I hope we keep that in mind, because we have people now in this city with talents, but they just can't get off the ground. And so going after dollars, I think, should really include some of the costs of really starting a business
And I think
in that
that's
area.
where your two conversations actually converge.
Right.
One of the things that's clearly missing is arts learning for artists.
Right.
It's building a business plan. It's reading and writing and reading a budget. It's producing a really good set of evaluation metrics before you get the grant. Right? So it sounds like I'm a bureaucrat, and you got it. We need to make sure that the artists have the kind of resources that they need to do a better job telling the story.
Right.
And that service is missing. Now, that is arising from the city's planning process, but it may not necessarily be a function of the city to respond to that.
Right, because we can't do it all.
You can't do it all, but you got to say, here's what we need in Columbia. Who is Little Red Hen, right?
So I think this will be very important, because you're talking now about really spreading up opportunities and accessibility to the arts.
This is called building a cultural system for Columbia. So everybody plays a part in it.
Everybody's on the same sheet. Are you done?
I'm done.
No, I think I'm excited too, and really looking forward to the strategic direction that you're going to give us, recognizing that there's some things that the city will do, there's some things that the city will do to help support others play their role in this. That we're recognizing just the changing nature of the arts, and everything we're talking about here, because I know we love to talk about money. Everything we're talking about here is not necessarily funding. We're talking about providing some comprehensive strategic direction for the region that works. I mean, so we're talking about a cultural plan that helps us make that 2036 goal a reality here in the Midlands. we get a monthly update. I'm not sure if you've seen that yet, Margie, on every grant we've ever applied for and got or not got since 2010. Is that what right? Yeah, so,
Kills a lot of trees.
Yeah, lots of trees. So when you print it out, you wish you hadn't. But they have been decidedly heavily public safety focused, community development focused. Probably lately, because of the work that Missy and John and Krista and others have been doing, really focusing on transportation and mobility, both literally Tiger grants and then also around biking and placemaking and the whole 9 yards. We found some success in certain spaces. I mean, like Knight Foundation, we shot our shot at Bloomberg. We went for it. Lee and the crew did a great job helping us pull that application together. But some of the places where we haven't been, I've had the executive director of IMLS and have had Kit in my office twice over the last year. So we spent a lot of time with her, addressed their group just a few months ago. But those places that are obvious opportunities, but in our blind spot because we're doing everything else, that's what we need you guys to let us know. I mean, that's why we stood up on Columbia. We're so happy with the work that's happened there. But we won't see everything. So we need to make sure we don't miss any opportunities to at least ask for it. We only have one person in the house. We bugged the crap out of her, helping us draft grants. She does a great job. She does a great job, and we have some subject matter expertise in certain areas. But we got some good folks, but we're devoid in the space in which you all occupy. So we rely heavily on you. So we need to know if we need to go after, if it's $10,000 grant or $50,000 grant, $100,000 grant, whatever it happens to be, and we'll give it a shot. We'll give it a shot. But my sense is with the volume of different things that when you saw Kyle and Ralph and Deborah do their thing earlier that we're dealing with, my guess is we won't be able to focus on those issues unless you bring them to us and we're able to get very strategic. I am very interested, and I think it's also worth noting, as Ms. Reese noted, that several of those sensitivities and concerns raised by artists are not just Columbia issues. Those are national issues. So we can address them in our space, which not only won't just be a balm, but it may also help us get ahead of other communities in which we compete with on a regular basis for that talent. So this is exciting. I really appreciate because I hear from people regularly. I sat down with those people, and I sat down and I mean, so this has been really, really grassroots and grass tops and exciting. And I'd say one last thing: if we are able to provide the cultural plan and the strategic direction, capital will flow from a number of different places. There are people who are looking to be a part of something much larger and much bigger, but they need to know that we've got a plan, we've got our act together, that we will. And if we do that, some of it'll be us, some will be philanthropic, some will be the universities, some will be purely private capital, people wanting to improve their communities, and some will actually be even these artists who have incredible talents and skills actually being able to monetize that in ways because we've helped them build the infrastructure to be good, strong, solid, sustainable businesses. So there's a whole lot.
Even patrons.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, patrons who've been supporting these organizations for years and years, as we talk to them, they do want to see a more robust future for the organizations they've been making investments in. And so that's where this issue of leadership transitions coming from. If we've been supporting these 5 organizations all these years, who's going to run them next? That's right. So that's the kind of conversation that you can wrap up into.
We really need your advice and counsel. We're going to wrap it up right now. But, you always get from us or from several of us, depending on the day, a preponderance or majority, a real sense that we want accountability. And we've got to focus as much on helping build strong organizations that won't be forever out of public support, because I believe we have a role and responsibility as a government to help support the continued development of the arts, but we also want to see some type of measured commitment to sustainability coming from our partners in the arts community. I know it's there, but but it's more there in some organizations than others. And we just got to figure out, kind of what our role is, other than succession planning, and really making sure that that we're asking for more. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. No, thank you, Lee. You had something else, Howard? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to brag on Ms. Reese. I've attended several of her meetings with the public, and she does a great job of pulling out the opinions from a diverse crowd, better skills than I've ever seen from anybody else, and I'm looking forward to your final product.
We have a quick video that I won't show now, but I'll leave it in the city manager's office. It just showcases our work with two groups of high school students as they think about building Columbia for the future and what culture and creativity needs to look like. But I'll leave it with the clerk, and maybe you can look at it.
Please give Rachel my best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we are ready for executive session.
Yes,
You want
ma'am.
to stay here or go to?
Do what?
Anything you need presenting?
Well,
Stay here. Please stay here.
we can. It doesn't matter, honestly. If y'all prefer to
Take
go
care.
ahead and transition, I'm curious about one item. If there's something to show electronically,
Hey, you good?
may have shown better down here. But do y'all have anything that needs to be?
What do you think about that, Steve?
I do it with you if you want me to.
Would you?
If you want me, yeah.
Oh, I wasn't planning on either one of y'all.
I got some.
Actually,
Yeah,
this
okay.
time.
I think he can do it.
I want the long
It's on the
ball. I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
We'll just make a laptop.
All right.
We can move up if y'all prefer.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah. You want to make a motion first?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Duval, you make a motion on the record?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion, we go into executive session for receipt of legal advice relating to pending, threatened, and potential claims in the section 30-4-70A, Kirby Bishop et al. Versus City of Columbia, claim of Clarence Hall, receipt of legal advice related to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 70A2, dockless transportation, stand-up scooters, Metro wastewater treatment plant, discussion of matters related to proposed location or expansion of services to encourage location or expansion of industries or other businesses pursuant to 70A2, Project Klein, Project Bull Street, and Project 604 UG. Discussions, and we have deferred on Greg Park Hills Creek discussion. Discussion of.
That was deferred?
We deferred that to the next meeting. Discussion of negotiations instant to propose contractual arrangements pursuant to 70A2 AMI in Finley Park.
You do City of Sawyer?
And City v. Sawyer. All right. Is that my amendment?
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Oh, did y'all add that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Move the previous question, clerk call the roll.
Aye. Yes.
Aye.
How you doing?
Aye.
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 That's not mine.
Who was here with us today? Okay. They found it on the floor.
City of Columbia. They haven't given me a pen yet.
You ordered it.
I wasn't necessarily going in the same order, but
Gave you one, give you a blue one.
Okay.